first memory, I was probably about just a toddler, and maybe not even a year and a half old. And I lived I was born next to Lake Erie, and my older sister, she was 19 years older than I, Margaret, took me down to the beach one day, and I remember kicking and yelling and screaming, and I heard the surf of the water, and the noise was so loud that I just don't know what happened. Everything fades out after that, but I couldn't stand it. Incidentally, Margaret, I was born at home, and my sister Margaret attended my birth, and I was the youngest of 9 children. And I said I was born in a brass bed, and she said, "Your problem was when you were born, you came out and you hit your head on the banister on the bed." And she always laughed. That was a big joke. And my next memory was I was probably about 5 years of age, and my brother William was 10 years older, and I was in the barn one day, and I put my finger up on the corn cutter, and he cut a section of my finger off, and I bear that as a remembrance every day I look at it, of my brother, my brother Willie. We call him Willie. The next memory, the next memory that really made a big mark in my life was when I was 6 years old, about 6. My brother Willie died. He came home, he was out with friends on a hay ride, and apparently he came home and developed pneumonia, and he died, and it was very sad to me. I couldn't understand it. So my father took me into the parlor. You know, those days, a farmhouse, we always kept a room separate where all your best furniture was for funerals, and when other people would gather for family gatherings. So they always kept it locked. So they put Willie in there in a coffin, and they had the coffin open, and my father took me and walked me over to the coffin and laid his hand on my very thick red hair and was explaining to me, and I looked at Willie in the coffin, and I just, from that day, it's affected my life, because I've often, even from the early age, I thought a lot about death. And I have a secret that goes on, that I write poetry. And about 40 or 50 years ago, I wrote poetry, and I wrote one about his death, and I think I would like to read it. They said Willie was dead, that he was at rest behind the door. Yet I see Willie from the fence, for he's riding Prince, and Shep is barking at my side, for he never wants Willie to ride. But I just love to see him go. They've drawn the shades, told me to stay outside, for Willie died. How can that be? Who will hold the sheep to shear, chase the cows across the field, shuck the corn, haul the hay, hoe all day? They say he's dead. I'll see him no more. I want Willie to come and play. I'll go in, ask him to come. Willie and I have such fun. I wrote that in an emotional eruption. And I like poetry, and English is my favorite subject in school anyhow. But we lived at that time in a farm. Well, my father was a farm manager. He had was grown up by his great uncles took him in after his father left home at the age of 14 and was never seen again. He surmised that he died in a bridge accident or had fallen in and was drowned. So he and his two siblings were farmed out to relatives, and my father went to work for his great uncles as a farmhand, and they worked him to death because they needed the farmhands. But in the meantime, they gave him, I guess, as good education as you could get then, because he went to Perrysburg High School, and I think he graduated. He was always rather bitter about that part of his life because I think they took advantage of him. But anyhow, they gave him an education, and he lived in a big house with his great uncles who were very well-to-do. They had sawmills and a lot of land and farming. She was of Irish-German stock, and she was Catholic, and she would not marry him unless he converted to Catholicism, which my father did, and he kept the vow and raised all his children as Catholic, and he kept that vow. My father loved children, and it's kind of odd that he would, but since he came from a broken home. But he loved children more than anything in the world. Chester Nicholas Stone. And he studied for the law. In those days, you didn't have to be licensed. You could get law books, study up on it, and then take cases. But my father got bored with it. He didn't like it. He worked as a engineer at the iron ore docks in Ashtabula, Ohio, where he was finally injured, and they fired him because in those days if you couldn't work or you were injured, you just laid off, and that's why he went into managing farms. He and my mother had, as I said, 9 children, 2 girls to start with, and then 7 boys, and I was the last, and they were hoping for a girl. They had already named me Rosemary. I guess they were sick of having so many sons, but that wasn't to be, so I came up John Patrick Stone, and I'm named after my great-grandfather, John Patrick Farley, who came to this country in the 1840s and was a writer, and he wrote for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and also became a big grocer or distributor of groceries in the city of Cleveland, where his first cousin was mayor for 2 terms. I went to school at a town about 5,000 population named Chardon, and I went in the 1st grade, and I didn't do well. I flunked. I played hooky. I was incorrigible. I followed my older brothers out of school playing hooky, and the teacher's name was Slaughterback. What a name, and it's a fitter. And she get me and put me in a closet, in a dark closet, and I just lie there and cry to myself. And I just hated it. I just flunked out. This Polish family that lived down the street, they had 3 daughters, beautiful. The oldest was about 20, and then one was 16, and one was my age. And her name was Elaine. And she was my best friend when I was going to the one-room schoolhouse. We used to play together all the time, and we'd get in the barn and jump down into the hay, and she was a real tomboy. And but I really loved her sister. That was the first love of my life. Her name was Virginia, and she was very beautiful. And I often went over to be with Elaine so I could take a peek at her sister all the time. But her sister, one day, Elaine and I were in a shed out near the house, front of the house, and we were playing doctor, and as young kids, we were trying to experiment and see what the differences were. And Virginia broke in on us, and she slapped Elaine and pulled her into the house and told me to get out. That broke my heart because I was thrown out of the place that I loved. But anyway, on that farm we had everything. We had chickens, cattle. I remember Willie's dog, Shep, when it would go out at, say, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and round up the cattle, he'd find the lead cow and start nipping at its heels, and the cows all came into the barn to be milked. And that's what the sheepdog was for. That's what he had. And then also, he used to go bareback. He and my brother Andy would ride bareback through the fields. We had about 2 teams of work horses and lots of chickens, sheep. We used to shear the sheep and everything imaginable in the farm. But my father apparently lost the job, and we had to move north of town, a couple miles. And I remember the day we moved. A lot of these things come back to me now. Remember, I was only about, at that time, 7 years old. So my job was, we had to have a cow. So we had a cow. In a depression, you needed a cow for your milk. So I had the job of leading this cow. It was in the summer. And I had a rope around his neck, and all the cow was just flipping its head all over the place. Well, of course, he was trying to swish off the flies, and I had to keep him on the side of the road so cars could get by. And I was so tired. And I guess I must have walked 3 miles or 4 miles, I don't know what it was. But by the time I got home to the new house, it was a new farmhouse with a wraparound porch. And by the time I got to the new house, I was sick as a dog. I came down with smallpox. You realize a lot of these diseases are, I think that probably came on to me because I was handling that cow. Because, you know, a lot of like chickenpox, smallpox, and a lot of that come from animals. They come from animals. And so I got chickenpox. I mean, measles. So what they did was, they put me in this bedroom with a bed, and pulled all the blinds. And my father, I guess, decided he better call a doctor. He'd already lost 2 sons, and I don't think he wanted to lose another one. So we called a doctor named Basquin. He came out, and I remember him giving me some kind of stuff on a spoon. I guess it was nothing, but they had to go through the motions. But anyhow, I had the measles for a number of days. They finally cleared up, but that was a very hard time for me. We had a lot of fruit trees and apple trees on this place, and we had a big garden during the Depression because my father worked on the road as blasting dynamite for road construction, and he made $1 a day. $1. There was no money. It was all in the hands of the rich people. The millionaires had all the money. It wasn't like today where we have Social Security and money's all over the place out here. People don't want to spend it, but it's here. But in the Depression, there was no money. There was no money. The state, I guess, had state road projects and things to help, but my father had a hard time. And I think with the vegetable gardens we hoed all the summer, I hated that. After hoeing corn in the tomato plants, and I used to, in the spring, or go to pick wild strawberries, and later in the summer, blackberries and things like that. And my mother canned fruits and vegetables and stored them in the cellar. We had bins where we stored apples and potatoes. So it was a lot of hard work. I went to a one-room schoolhouse. There was 6 grades, and each grade was represented by a row of typical school desks from front to back. There was 6 grades. I was in the first. I started in the first grade there, and my nephew was a year older than I was, in the 2nd grade, and my brother Andrew was in the 6th grade. But anyhow, one day going to school, I found a quarter on the side of the road, and I thought I was a millionaire. I didn't know how to spend it all, so I went to the candy shop and got 2 pieces of licorice for a penny to start with. But this one-room schoolhouse, we had outhouses. We had a potbelly stove in the middle of the school and blackboards around it. And my school teacher's name was Helen Jackman, and she used to write little sayings on the board, blackboard. A penny served is a penny saved is a penny earned. Pretty is as pretty does. And but she was a good teacher, and she got a hold of me and turned me around because she saw something in me, I guess the fact that I could learn, and she gave me, it's surprising that how much attention she gave me, and so I loved learning, and I wanted to please her. So I say today how important it is to have a good teacher. She was a mentor teacher, and I did so well that I was provisionally passed to catch up, 1 grade, to catch up to where I ought to be. So I went from the 1st to the 3rd grade. And she was, those days, she was the disciplinarian too. And we had some yokel kids. They were way over their age for their classes, but they were big, and they were very incorrigible. And one day she told them to go out there and get a hickory stick, bring it in, and she laid them across had a couple of them. She laid them across the desk and whipped the devil out of them, and she became exhausted. They didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. But she got worn out by it. But anyhow, those kids were thrown out of school. It shows you how times change. I mean, the teacher was in charge, and she wanted discipline, and she got it. And if you didn't toe the line, out you went. Another memory I have, I would go back to the memories again. I think of this. When I was on that first farm I was telling you about, my mother used to take her horse. She had a horse, a black horse. But anyhow, when she got into town, she threw the reins over some kind of a device they had to keep the horse in place, and she'd go in and buy groceries. I think it was A&P store at that. And when she come out, she always brought a carrot or a apple. And she'd hold the apple up under the horse's mouth, and the horse would just love it. And he slobbered in, and she asked me to feed him, and I said I wouldn't do it because I didn't like to think of putting my hand under that horse's mouth. With all that slobbering, I thought I'd lose my hand. I enjoyed learning, and I stayed at that one-room schoolhouse for all the way through the 6th grade. Then we moved back into town. We were moving all the time during the Depression. We rented places. Nobody could own them unless you inherited and had a lot of money. So we rented places. So we went back into town, and I went to the 7th and 8th grade in a school called Chardon. It's interesting that today my nephew, Al was my wife's nephew, teaches at the same school. He teaches history, I think. I went to Chardon for the 7th and 8th grade and graduated from elementary school. And it was while we were in this is 1934. I guess I must have been in the 8th grade or about somewhere near that. And my mother died at that time. I was 13 when she died, and I think she had a heart attack because she had eaten something and fell over and one of my brothers ran to get the doctor. We didn't have a phone. But by the time they got back, she was dead. I didn't know about it. I was upstairs in bed sleeping with my nephew. We shared a bed. And I came down the next morning and found out that she was dead. I never spent too much of my time growing up with my mother because she'd been hospitalized quite a lot. But I do remember quite fondly, one memory was she loved to write poetry, and she was quite musical. And I remember in the summer I'd be on the porch, sitting on the edge of the porch with my head in her lap while she sang and recited poetry and patted me on the head. But anyhow, and then I remember the mulberries would fall off the roof, tin roof, hit the tin roof and fall down on the ground. And she would recite her poetry. She was good-natured. She was very good-natured. And but then, after Chardon High School, after I graduated in 8th grade, we moved again out further into the country. Went into a town called Mountville. And it's a community with a little crossroads and a couple little grocery stores and a few houses. And we had a small house there. And my father, my brother Andy, my brother Larry, and Teddy and I lived there. My father took care of us. I don't know how he did it. But anyhow, I was going to go to Thompson High School. A lot of kids didn't go to school as they got in those days because they needed them on the farm and they'd lost interest in education. A lot of them wanted to get a job. They wanted to be a farmer or a truck driver or something else. But I wanted to continue my education. So I went to Thompson High School, which is about 5 miles north of Mountville. And these two townships, Chardon and Mountville, combined to make a school, a high school. So it's a country high school. There's not a lot of students there, probably several hundred. In my graduating class, there were only 23. And I was salutatorian, and I got good grades. I played on the basketball team. I was the center. I was probably one of the tallest in the class. I only weighed about 165 pounds, and I was 6 feet tall. I think baseball is my favorite sport because I was a pitcher and first baseman, and I pitched in a lot of games, a lot, and well, all over the county. There were, I don't know, maybe 16 townships in the county, and we had a schedule to play them all. And I remember going to basketball tournaments, and also we had the baseball I liked a lot. My subjects were pretty much English, history, algebra, geometry, and maybe civics, government, whatever, geography. I had good subjects. And I decided to take up typing. Well, there weren't many in my typing class. I probably thought, everybody thought it was probably sissified to take up typing. Only girls typed. But I said, I'm going to learn to type. So I joined the class and I enjoyed it. And I got, so I could, by the time I graduated from that class, I was doing about 60 words a minute. So it was to be a big factor in my life, typing. I didn't know it at the time. Hell, I probably could have ever afforded a typewriter, but I learned to type. Well, I enjoyed high school. I think I enjoyed high school more than any other phase of my education. More so than, I hated grade school pretty much. I really hated grade school, except for Mrs. Jackman in the country one-room school. That was okay. But otherwise, I didn't like grade school. I loved high school because I was free and I was in sports And I'm discovering girls and nightclubs. And I remember when I was, some of my activities growing up, I mean, we didn't have a lot, but I had good friends, and I loved to dance. My brother Andy, there was a store in Mountville that upstairs of the store they had a big dance floor, and every Saturday night they had dances. They'd have they'd have 3 people playing or something, and everybody got up there and danced. And I would sit in a chair and watch them. And one day, I guess I was about 15 or 16, Andy, my brother Andrew, who was 4 years older than I, we were quite close, had a new girlfriend. And I guess she wanted to make numbers, so she pulled me up out of my chair and made me dance. Well, I was foxtrotting and dancing. It wasn't long before I loved it. I'd rather dance than do anything. One time in my life, I'd rather play bridge than anything, but this was that phase of my life when I'd rather dance. So what happened then is my school years, high school years, and the weekends, when I earned some money, I would go all these, every township had a little dive, like, you call it a dive, but they weren't rowdy. You go like a hole in the wall, small dance floor, and you could take your friends or meet your girls there and drink some beer. That's the type of fun we had, dancing, and that's all about a high school. That's really like, I guess I was free and easy then. Then in the summertime I spent a lot of time swimming and going to swimming holes and stuff like that. I think maybe I was more like Huckleberry Finn, just gay, happy, go lucky. I was a happy-go-lucky kid. My work, summer work, where I would mow lawns. I did a lot of mowing of lawns. I had a client, a neighbor who, both of them were teachers, so they had money. That was a good job in the Depression. A steady job, pretty good pay. And then both of them worked as teachers, and they had a big, not a farm, a big country house not far out of town with a lot of fruit trees and lawn. And I mowed lawn for 25 cents an hour. And during the summer, I earned enough money, probably close to $20, and saved it up to buy myself a worsted wool suit, dark gray. I wanted it for my graduation, and Sears and Roebuck catalog was used a lot, and I took all my measurements as they said and sent in my order and money, and not long I got my suit. It was beautiful. I loved it. And so that was, now other jobs I did some farming. Like during the Depression, a lot of times if the berry season was in, with my father and brothers, we'd go out and pick gooseberries and all kinds of fruit stuff, and that's where we earned extra money. We're much like migrant workers today. We got to get any place you could get the money, you'd get it, and we'd do it together and share it to raise the family. Oh yeah, I caddied when I was in grade school, 7th and 8th grade at Chardon Country Club, and I used to get about, if I was lucky, I'd get 50 cents for caddying all afternoon. But I did that for a while in the summer, and I enjoyed it. I learned a little something about golf, and but it was a pretty big job because I had to carry all these heavy. Of course, I was a pretty big, stocky, a pretty good sized kid, but I had to carry all these golf clubs around for these wealthy people who came out from the city, I guess. I don't know who they were, but I was just a caddy. Oh, and then also I would spend time when I had an extra quarter or so, go to the movie in Chardon in a small movie theater and sit through the movie 2 or 3 times. and I could see. I watched Shirley Temple movies, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, all the cowboy movies, and I used to get so emotionally involved in the movies, and I wanted to get to start to cry or something, and I'd say, "Oh, don't! It's only cardboard. It's only cardboard. It's not real." I mean, that was a popular outlet in those days. Shirley Temple movies. It made people feel good, and but movies were a big thing. And another thing, when I got into the service, you know, every night they had a movie. I've seen so many movies that today I haven't been in a movie theater for 40 years. I can't stand to see them. I don't mind seeing a good movie on television. I can sit there, but I'm not going to a theater or any place like that anymore. I just burned out. I just saw so many movies. But that's another form of entertainment. We didn't have a lot of money, and we just had to make do with what we had. Radio was big. I remember the first time we on the farmhouse when I was about 6 or 8 years old. We'd all gather around the radio and listen to the Fireside Chat. Franklin Roosevelt, building up our hope. And that's the one thing at least he did, was add hope and try different things. But we all thought he was our salvation. And I remember they came out one time with a Townsend plan. They were going to give every family $200. And I said to myself, I went to bed and I said to myself, how would anyone spend $200? I tried to check off all the things I needed or buy, and I couldn't buy all the stuff with $200. Because you could buy a hamburger for 2 pounds for $1, good hamburger. I mean, 2 pounds for a quarter, 2 pounds for a quarter, a hamburger. Eggs, 10 cents a dozen, bread, 10 cents. That's why you could live on maybe $1 a day. Gasoline was very cheap. I don't think it's about 15 or 20 cents, 25 at the most. And you hand pumped it. But after I finished high school, I was looking. I wanted to go to college, to tell you the truth. This is funny. I got on a learning track, and I didn't want to get off of it. My mind was, I wanted to explore things, but you know, unless you had money, you didn't go to college. And I didn't know about scholarships. Nobody had any programs that lead you that way. So when I got out of high school, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just beside myself. There's no jobs, and except maybe some farm work or extra work picking fruit and so on. But anyhow, by October, I think, my nephew is my sister's oldest boy who was born out of wedlock. He turned out to be a great guy. I often think today, if we turned the clock ahead 75 or 80 years, they would probably have aborted him. But not in those days, they didn't. If some of your children or somebody turned up pregnant, they stuck together and raised him. So they raised him. I did not know, probably until I was 7 or 8 years old, that he was not my brother. Because we were raised like brothers. We wrestled all over the yard and slept in tents, and I mean, we just, I don't know, just tore at each other all the time. But I mean, that was kids. I mean, we were just boys, year apart. He was a little bigger than I was, and a lot of times he got the best of me. But anyhow, I had to live with it. But he died within the last few years. He had a farm, a big farm, and it was quite successful and well liked. He never went to college. He never had the education I did. He quit high school. I remember when I was in high school, we'd walk down the corridor, and he'd look over at me and yell, "Hey, Uncle John, Uncle John." God, that made me so mad that here, a 15-year-old kid being called uncle? But anyhow, he quit high school after 1 year and went to work for a farmer and married the farmer's daughter, and eventually had children and inherited the whole farm. So, but he worked the farm, and he was a good farmer, and everybody, all his friends loved him. In the summer, he had gardens, and he put vegetables out on the front on a table for people, the neighbors could come along and take him. That's the way he was, and he knew an Amish. He knew all the Amish. There's a lot of big Amish country there, and he used to take me down there years later to talk to the Amish, even the Amish. What they had, an Amish bishop, and I saw how they made furniture, and what beautiful farms they had, and the horses and so forth. And but they liked him a lot, and my brother Andrew knew a lot of them too, because he had a milk cartage business and hauled a lot of their milk, and he knew a lot of the Amish too. So the Amish, they were very respectful of the Amish. But that's enough. But Ted died about, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago. He's a year older than I am. And they said one day, he'd had some heart problems, but I think his big problem was he loved to eat beef. I mean, he had a farm, and he had cows and pigs, and he slaughtered them and had just freezers full of beef. I think he ate too much beef. But anyhow, he had a good death in a way. He couldn't walk hardly, but the night before he died, he asked his sons or his grandsons, he wanted to go out and check out his garden. He loved his garden. He wanted to go check his garden out. So they took him out, I don't know, in a wheelchair or somehow or other, or a walker, and it wasn't too far away. He walked over to his garden to check and see how everything was going, and he then went back into the house, lay down, and died. Yes, that was a good death. At least he saw what he was happy. But he was unlike me in so many ways. I went out into the world, eventually went out into the world, but he stayed home. He was provincial, very provincial, but I don't fault him for that, because I think he had a good life and was well respected. And you have to make your choices in this world. I didn't have much choice, so I'll get back to my story after I graduated. There was no work, but Ted and I got a job picking apples in a big apple orchard, and we had a big bag and we carried around in front of us and ladders up the tree, and we averaged about 100 bushels a day, and we got 5 cents a bushel, so we earned $5 a day. So over time, I know in 2 or 3 weeks, I made pretty good sized money. I think when we split it up, we had about $40 a piece. And then I heard the radio announce that the Marines were recruiting, and they talked about travel and all that stuff. And I said, my gosh, maybe this is the way out. So I, right away, I think I had to get my father's permission. I was only 18. I signed up. I went to Cleveland, signed up. They did a physical. Within a few days, I passed it, and they got orders to move. So on November, I think it was November 8th, I shipped out from Cleveland to go to Parris Island boot camp, and by train. I'd never ridden on a train before. Remember this, I was just an innocent country bumpkin. That's how I call him, innocent country bumpkin. I had no idea what I was getting into. I just jumped with both feet and said, to hell with it. Nothing could be worse than not doing anything. So the Marines offered me an opportunity. Another thing that caused me to make this decision was by September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and England and France had a treaty with Poland to protect them. So England and France declared war on Germany, and I knew that we'd eventually get in it. Here I am, his only youngest son, and we always had a very good relationship, leaving. I knew my father was torn between two feelings. One was maybe he can take care of himself and have a life, and I'm glad to see him go. But then the other feeling was he didn't want me to go. Because when I finally left, I think my brother Larry took me into Cleveland. When I finally left, he stood at the front porch and raised his hand to say goodbye, and I could see that he was hiding tears behind his sleeve as I left. Today, that really gets to me. Then I didn't think that much about it. But in retrospect, having had 5 sons and a daughter, I can see how a father would feel. I guess you have to be in that position. Well, anyhow, I left Cleveland aboard a train. I'd never been on a train before. Then there was an incident. Sometimes there's incidents in your life that you remember that really affect you a lot. And I was on this train with my 3 or 4 guys who were going with me, and we were probably playing cards and just, kibitzing around. I was sitting by a little table between the seats, and this guy came over to me. He was well-dressed, mannerly, and he looked a man of substance, and he sat down, and he started to talk to me about where we were going, what we were going to do, and all that. And I was telling him, and then he said, you're going to amount to something. I think you're going to be very successful. And he didn't say anything else. And I thought, well, maybe he sees something I don't see. But I'm reminded again, a few words of encouragement along the way, it can be a big boost to somebody's morale. And here I was, I was out there by myself and nothing in the world. Here's a man come up and for some reason others said that. Sometimes I think the good Lord does things for you like that. And I was very moved by it. Well, anyhow, our first stop was Washington, D.C. So I go in the terminal, Washington terminal, and let's go up to the counter to get something to eat. And my God, I thought I was in a foreign land. The southern accent just burst out all over the place. You don't realize how southern Washington, D.C. is in talk. And I was fascinated. I couldn't figure out what they were saying most of the time. But anyhow, I got something to eat, but that was amused me. Then I got back on the train, and then I was amused when we went through the South. It looked so poor. Everything looked so poor. At that time, it was. And then I remember the train, as we approached Paris and all, the conductor selling Yamasee, Yamasee, Yamasee. There's a Yamasee, South Carolina. Have you ever been there? Okay, well, anyhow, it's up where Bill's first hunting lodge was, near Yamasee. But anyhow, we got to Paris Island, and we lost all our dignity immediately. We got off the train. The first thing they did was, we had to get into GI clothes. They stripped us all of our own clothes, and they shaved our heads, completely shaved our heads. We all looked alike. That's what they wanted. So you lost your dignity. And boot camp, I'm telling you, it was, I don't know, you were just intimidated by everything. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to intimidate you, make you just, I don't know, shaking your boots. And that's what they did. That's what they did. There were a lot of mean bastards who were GIs. They don't have them today like that. They had them then, and they would, in mornings, when you got out, they handed me a straight razor to shave with. I had never shaved with a straight razor in my life, and I only had a few minutes to get shaved. And my body was all bloody, my face and everything else. Have to have tissue all over it, that type of thing. They get out on the drill field, and if you didn't keep up, they'd jump on your back. And if you were standing at attention and the flies, there's called sand flies. They're little flies that would come up and bite you, and they stung. And if you try to bat at one of those when you're supposed to be at attention, they'd get all over you. But you know, the Marine Corps, in later years, they lost a number of people. They used to drop marshals right under buildings, and I mean squat, and you march you through swamps, up to your ass in mud or dirt or whatever, and that. But anyhow, I hung on. After 6 weeks, I got out of it. But I just think boot camp. I know what they were doing. They were forming us not to obey orders. In other words, and that's as it should be, I guess. In the military, yours is not the reason why. Yours is but to do or die. Do what I say. And you just have to learn discipline. That's the way they did it. I think they're a little more subtle today, but boy, they were mean then. So after I got out of boot camp, I was assigned to the headquarters company in Paris Island and became a military police for a while. And that was my first experience with a hurricane. This was in November, I think, and they had a terrible hurricane by today's standards, probably a 2 or 3. It came through Paris Island and knocked down a lot of the buildings. It was just flattened. They were all wooden buildings. Today they're brick. They rebuilt the whole thing. And I remember being the military police, I had to get out and do guard duty and stuff. And you couldn't get from one building to another without a rope. They had to tie ropes between the buildings so they wouldn't blow away. And there's a lot of things in this world you learn as you get older. Can you imagine? I was assigned to the officers' quarters to prevent looters. Can you believe that in the military service, in the Marine Corps? And that just shows you how severe that storm was. People thought they were going to lose their lives. So they just lose everything. This is typical. But I was surprised that would happen in the Marine Corps base. After I was there for about, 6 months or so, they wanted, they had to send out Marines to 3 different places. One of them was Panama, Republic of Panama in South America. The other one was the new Naval Air Station based in Jacksonville. So I can tell you, that was about 1940. Or Corpus Christi, Texas. And I was selected to go to Panama. I'm glad of that. That was a good experience. So I went to Charleston and boarded a ship. It was an Army ship used as transport, still run by the Army, in World War I. And it was awful. The food was terrible. I was just a dirty ship, that's all. I mean, the Army doesn't run ships like the Navy. And I remember the experience sitting on the spool. I guess that's where they wrap the lines to anchor the ship. I would sit on the spool there, and I kept saying to myself, am I going to get seasick? Everybody's getting seasick. Everybody's thrown up. Everybody's going over to the railings and thrown up, but I didn't get seasick. And I looked as the ship, and it disappeared, the land disappeared. That was a funny feeling, to see your country disappear as you drive out to sea for the first time. Well, the ship, I couldn't eat their slop, so I took whatever money I had and went to the canteen and bought candy bars and lived off of those. It's a sad feeling leaving your country because for the first time, because you think, gosh, is this the end? Will I ever get back? And but anyhow, when we ran, I want to tell you something about Panama. Do you know that the entrance to the Panama, the eastern entrance, is further west than the western entrance? You'll have to get out a map and check it. That's an interesting trivia question. But anyhow, when I got to Panama, I got aboard a train. I never crossed the Panama Canal in a ship. I was always crossed it by train. And I went to Balboa, which is near Panama City. And I was assigned to a naval ammunition depot. We were going to do guard duty of the ammunition depot. I guess it serviced the whole area with ammunition. And we did patrol duty around it. And that was a good duty. We had beautiful barracks with fans, ceiling fans. Panama has a nice temperature. It's not as humid as Florida, I don't think. And it gets nice and chilly at nights. And we had, in our barracks, we had a bowling alley in the bottom, canteen, and you could get cigarettes, 2 packs for a quarter. I took up smoking out of boredom, and I smoked 2 packs a day. Wow. Well, anyhow, then we had baseball diamonds, a swimming pool, and a lot of recreational facilities. Because in the tropics, I guess they think you need a little something extra to keep you from going mad. But anyhow, I liked it, and I was promoted right along. I think I got to be sergeant by the time my father died. And I was in Panama when he did die. But anyhow, while in Panama, the captain called me in one day. Our Marine detachment was headed by a captain. The Naval Naval Ammunition Depot was, the commanding officer was a captain, a Navy captain, which is a high rank. Don't mistake infantry captain with a Navy captain. There's no comparison. The Navy captain is equivalent to a full colonel in the Army or Navy. I mean, Army or Marines. So the captain called me in the office one day, and they looked over my records and saw that I had put down a skill of typing. So instead of I was assigned to be his company clerk. So that way I got to know the captain very well. And it was my inroads in to becoming an officer. I didn't know that typing would make me an officer. But anyhow, I did the payroll, and I did his letters and everything, and so I was in contact with him a lot. Well, I was in Panama. I remember, didn't I tell you about Pearl Harbor? We were out playing baseball one day, and normally we could pick up it was in the rainy season, and we pick up our gear and go in about 3 o'clock, usually, because we know it's going to rain. But this day, one day, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, I think, the news came over, somebody said, the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, and we all rushed into the barracks because we knew we were going to be at war, and we gathered around the radio and listened to the reports about the war. We knew then that our life would change, and they changed all the post was put on alert, and I was assigned a machine gun nest over the Miraflores locks on the west coast because we didn't know whether or not the Japanese, or we thought they might, attack. And so at that time, I had gotten malaria and lost a lot of weight. And my father had died, and I couldn't go home because it was wartime. They didn't have the transportation and available for me. So I was very saddened by his death because I was very fond of him. And but anyhow, I was manning a machine gun nest and was way up on a hill. I know it was quite a struggle to walk up and down the hill when I was so, I'd lost a lot of weight. But then one day, I guess I've already covered the fact that I had become the company clerk, and this is where my skills as a typist came in, because the commanding officer called me in and said he needed a clerk and that I would do that. And so I did his letters and payroll and so forth, and I came in constant contact with him. Well, it seems like the word went out that they were looking for non-commissioned officers, people of a certain education, to fill the ranks of officers because they would have a shortage. So they want to. I was the company commander asked me if I wanted to go to officers training, and I was overwhelmed by the fact that I was really be elevated greatly if I'd be going into the officer class. So I told him yes, and he made arrangements for it. I had to take several courses. I think I took solid geometry, another course that the Navy boards required. I passed those, and with the commanding captains and his recommendations, I was accepted at Quantico, Virginia. And so I left Panama in about early December, I think, 1942. And I got aboard a ship, a small ship, and we went through the Caribbean at a good clip because there were submarines operating in the area then pretty heavily. And I'm talking about enemy submarine. And our ship had such speed that we didn't have to worry about it because they couldn't sight on us. But eventually, in a few days, we caught up with a huge convoy going on to New York, and so we joined them. The ship, I was the only Marine on the ship, and but I remember one day, it's so nostalgic, I heard a phonograph playing. The song had just came out, and Bing Crosby was singing it. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas with every... Well, that was so nostalgic because I was going home for Christmas. I hadn't been there for several years. And here's that song. They played it over and over and over again. And I never got tired of it. But I remember the ship going through Cape Hatteras, and our ship wasn't that big, but it was such a rough sea that you just had to grab a hold or would be thrown overboard. And I remember the ship going zoom up and down and up and down, and then as it was going, it would be going sideways like that. And you know, the amazing thing to me is I never got seasick. I never got seasick. A lot of people did, but I didn't. I think most people got seasick. So I remember your mother years later. She used to get car sick, or driving a car. A lot of people get that too. But anyhow, I we went to New York, and I went through around the Statue of Liberty. That's the first time came back saw New York. I passed the Statue of Liberty. Eventually went to the terminal in New York and boarded a train to Ohio, and I shivered and I was cold all the way because I had come from the tropics. I didn't have heavy clothes, and I just shivered. I mean, I guess, I don't know, they said my blood was thin or something, but it was a sudden jerk, and I was so happy to get home by that time. But at that time, I didn't have any home, actually, because my father was dead and gone, and so he had been living at my brother's farm. So I went out there and stayed with them. They put me up in after my father died. If I went home to my brother Andrew's farm, and I got along with him real well. And also his wife, Ina, and I were very compatible. We got along very well. And I had for years, until she died a couple of years ago, I was always very fond of her and got along with her real well. But anyhow, so after getting home, I was ordered, my orders, which I had with me, to go to Quantico, Virginia, to enter officers training. So after this furlough, I went to Quantico and went into training, and I don't know how long it lasts, about 6 weeks or so. Very heavy training of all military tactics and procedures and so forth. And I graduated, I guess, about in the middle of my class, and I was commissioned as second lieutenant. My brothers, Andrew and Larry, Andrew is 4 years older and Larry is 8 years older, they came to my graduation. And I remember after the graduation, this was the true test of being an officer. We were walking down the street and I saw an enlisted man coming towards me, and I said to myself, I wonder if he'll salute. I wonder if he'll recognize me. I wonder if I have reached the godlike sphere of being an officer. And as we crossed the street, he gave me a nice snappy salute, and I returned it. So I knew I had made the grade. So after Quantico, I was assigned to New River, North Carolina, to officers training. I was assigned a task of training new officers from the ROTC officers who maybe come out of Dartmouth, Harvard, and whatever, University of Chicago. They went through ROTC and were commissioned, but they had to go through Marine training, and when they assigned to the Marines. So I was training them in weaponry and so forth, and my colonel sent me and 4 other officers to Fort Benning, Georgia for 6-week training. I had to take the officers training courses, and I made some good friends down there. And that training was to add to our abilities to train other officers. So we came back to North Carolina and continued our duties of training. We trained them in boat landing operations, camouflage, weaponry, anything involved, or night marches, all that. So at that time, they were forming the 6th Marine Division, the last division formed in the Marines. I felt very fortunate at this time because you realize this was about mid-1943, and I hadn't seen combat. I mean, we've been in combat a number of years. I hadn't seen combat. And I said to myself, wow, maybe I'll get out of this. I'll just keep being a training officer and do my job, and boy, I'll miss this combat duty. But you know what? I remember later that there was, that the Marine Corps Commandant said, There are two types of Marines. One who is in combat, and the other is the one who's going to combat. So we're going to get a taste of it sooner or later. So our regiment, which was the 29th Regiment, there are 3 regiments in a battalion, about 3,500 people in a regiment. The regiment consists of 3 battalions, and each battalion has about 4 companies. And I was in I Company, the 29th Marine Regiment, 6th Marine Division. Actually, my company, I, was the last company formed in the Marine Corps, an infantry company formed in the Marine Corps in World War II. And so we were in training in New River with the new, going through all kinds of maneuvers and instructions and so forth. And the regiment, there was 2 regiments formed in the United States and one in the Pacific, made up of a lot of veterans who were pulled into these, because this was almost raw talent. I mean, we had a lot of old combat veterans interspersed in the regiment. And we got on a train and went across the country to San Diego. And it was quite an experience because I remember looking, as we got towards the West Coast, I'd see mountains in the distance. It seemed like the train traveled all day long before I even got to the mountains. And the temperature was dry. I mean, you didn't sweat out there. That was the strangest thing. You don't have the humidity in the West. So but we eventually ended up at Camp Pendleton, which is a big Marine base on the West Coast. We did a little practice and maneuvering around at that time for a while, waiting for our ship, which we boarded. I remember, I think it was in Los Angeles, and it was called the Snorton Morton, USS Morton, M-O-R-T-E-N. And I remember a lot of the troops, their wives had come to the West Coast with their children to wave them goodbye. And one man had a dog, and he was so worried about who's going to take care of his dog. And my best friend in the Marines was named Babe Ruth. His name was Sherman B. Ruth. He was from Gloucester, Massachusetts. And he's a young guy. I mean, he was about my age, and he was married and had a young son. And he loved to play baseball. But anyhow, we became very close friends. We used to share letters back and forth. I mean, in the service, you form very close relationships with some people, and he was an excellent man. But anyhow, we got aboard the ship and headed for Guadalcanal, our staging area, where we were in maneuvers for about 6 months there. Guadalcanal is about 500 miles northeast of Australia, well below the equator. I mean, yes. And so this ship, I don't know how long it took, maybe a couple of weeks, but I often wondered why we were out there alone. But by this time in the war, we had control of the sea and pretty much the air, so they didn't have to worry about submarines because we were traveling fairly south. And so we were relatively safe. As we crossed the international date line, and also the south equator to the south. And in the equator, when you go over the equator, you get initiated. This is true of anybody. And they have an initiation service that they would strip us down to our shorts and hose us down on a slippery deck and make us run. And they use the electric prods to give us a little electric shot at our buttocks and throw us in barrels of terrible water and so forth. But we got through it. They do that for entertainment. People get bored on board ship, and I guess somebody years ago devised this initiation ceremony for anybody going across the equator. So that's quite common occurrence. And I remember aboard the ship, so many people aboard the ship, I guess about 3,500, and I'd go down in the hole in the center of the ship where the big area was, where they had slung hammocks and beds and everything else, and it was such a stinking mess and so forth, and people, and just the human odors, and I couldn't stand it, so I would go up on the deck and climb the ladders. In the Navy, ships you don't have steps, you have ladders. I went up about 3 stories, and I would lie down on the deck, look up at the stars, beautiful breezes, and have a good night's rest, and look at the southern stars, things I'd never seen before. Finally we ran into Guadalcanal, and as we approached the beaches, you could see ships, ruined Japanese ships, all over the shoreline, because there had been a number of naval battles, big naval battles in and around Guadalcanal in the early days, and that was the first offensive battle of the war. The Marines finally took Guadalcanal, and it was my platoon sergeant of my platoon. I was a platoon leader at that time, and I had probably about, I don't know how many were in the platoon, about maybe 45 or so, and my platoon sergeant was named Jake Heim, and he had been in Guadalcanal as a paratrooper. So I did have somebody in my company in charge who was a combat veteran whom I had to rely on greatly. He was very well liked by his men, and was a strong individual. I got along with him real well. All my orders went through him. As an officer, I didn't talk to the men particularly unless I was inspecting them or something, but I'd tell him what I wanted done, and he had it done, and the men really loved him. Incidentally, I'm going forward, but Jake won the Navy Cross, which is the highest award you could get in the Navy, which I put him up for it, and he got it, the Navy Cross. But we'll get to that, Jake Heim. But anyhow, he was a great source of strength and leadership, and I really relied on him a lot. I probably wouldn't have gotten through it without him. But anyhow, we were going to Guadalcanal and to maneuver and do exercises and so forth. We knew that we were going into combat, but we didn't have any idea where we were going. So for about 6 months, during the rainy season also, Guadalcanal's kind of a pretty hilly, mountainous, with cool streams, and we used to go up there and fish. We'd throw in dynamite caps into the water and stun the fish, and we'd dive in and catch them. They'd stun the fish, and we'd see some of the natives up in the interior. But anyhow, we had I was living in a tent, an officer's area, where we were right on the beach with a beautiful beach and high waves, and we could swim every day. And we had a lot of facilities brought in, our canteen where you could buy supplies. And we did maneuvers, like one of them I remember greatly was we'd go and march through kunai grass, which is probably up to your shoulders, in this hot climate in the tropics with full field pack. Some days we'd be out there marching for 8 hours or so, and some people died from it, I think. And I know a lot of people collapsed from heat exhaustion. But I remember one day I was a lead outfit going single file up the side of a mountain or something. It was a short mountain. And the colonel was in the rear, coming up in the rear. Our colonel was named Bleasdale, and I guess he was about 56 years old. He had white hair. And he's from the old school. He was from World War I. He's highly decorated. But he was still, I think, using techniques that he used in World War I. But anyhow, he used to tell us to put branches and trees in our hats and belts and so forth for camouflage and all that. And every time he approached us, the men would say, here comes the old man, make like a tree. Well, you know, anybody in command in the service is called the old man. Well, when I commanded my company, eventually at the age of 23, I was called the old man. Well, that's traditional. But anyhow, he was coming up the rear of the column where we were moving up to a position. And, you know, it's like an accordion. I was in the front, setting the pace, and like an accordion, it gets as further away from the end. I mean, it's harder for the people to catch up. They have to keep moving faster to catch up. It acts like an accordion. And the colonel was so mad. He said, "Tell Mr. Stone if he doesn't slow down, I'll have him locked up in an irons by sundown." So this word went along the lines all the way up, and I slowed down, but that's okay. I like the colonel. We get along well. But my company, you see, they brought ammunition into Guadalcanal a lot. I mean, brought of the stores from the Pacific fighting, they brought it into Guadalcanal. And one night, we were in I'd just gone to sleep, and all of a sudden, the loudest boom you ever heard in your life. I about fell out of bed. I thought it was an earthquake. And it come to find out, we had our job, one of our jobs was to go, we went south, I guess it was about 10 miles on the island, to unload ammunition ships. That was our job, occasionally. So we'd unload ammunition ships during the night. I'd have my company do it. And, but this one night, we were in our bed, at our own place, the ammunition blew up. It was an accident. And I think there was about 500 people killed. This never got out. Nobody ever said anything. Because, you know, you wouldn't give any information like that to the enemy. But it was a horrible thing. And the blast was so loud, it would sound so close. And so we got into our Jeep and we rushed down there to find out what had happened. I remember one night unloading the ammunition, hand unloading it and stacking it on the deck or whatever on the land. I had the detail, and afterwards you always have them been line up or whatever, and count for them where they're at. I mean, you have a certain number go, you make a certain number come back, you have to watch it. So going back, I was missing one man. I come to find out the guy had crawled up on a stack of ammunition and fell asleep, and they had dropped ammunition on him. He was dead. That's some way to die, isn't it? The duty there was not bad. I mean, I liked the country and I liked the climate most of the time and the facilities. And but one day they said, we're going to have beer. We're going to have, and we said, oh my God. I think we all died to have a beer. I mean, but a cold brew. So they told us to line up at the parade grounds, and they would issue the brew. Well, so all the men were out there lined up. They were going to get 2 cans of beer. And when they got there, it was warm beer. And nobody took it. They were so, I mean, you know, Navy ships and so forth, they have refrigeration, but I don't know why the people in charge thought people would, what would they do with cold beer? Nobody took it. I don't know, if you call that a mutiny? I don't think they quieted it up. I don't think they did anything about it because it's like a direct, I mean, the officers tell you go out there and take 2 beers and you don't take it. That's like mutiny. We finished our training and then we boarded a ship, a troop ship, and this was probably, it's 1940, this was in 1945 by this time. See, we went to Guadalcanal probably in this, maybe August of 44, and then after our training was finished, we went aboard ship about, I would say it's probably in late March, or probably late March, early April. No, it had to be late March. It probably was March, somewhere in March anyhow, March 1945. And we went quite a way, you know, Guadalcanal to where our destination, they finally told us was Okinawa, where we're going to attack. That's quite a distance. I mean, you're really very far south of the Philippines, and so that's a long trip, so it probably took a while. Then we went up through the Philippines, past Guam, and Okinawa is about 500 miles southeast of Japan. It's a part of Japan, southwest of Japan. And it's a group of islands, Okinawa being the largest. So on the way, about halfway, we stopped at an atoll called Mog, M-O-G. It's on the map, in the Pacific map, you'll look and find it. And we stopped there for a little recreation. We got off the ship and they did have beer. So we got to get some cold beer. That was, I guess that's the last hurrah. That was your last hurrah before combat. So we reboarded ship and headed to Okinawa. While we were on our way, we'd have training courses in how do you handle prisoners and first aid and many of the things that you become to your attention while you are in combat. And so on April 1st was our date, 1945, April 1st. We were going to storm the beaches of Okinawa. My company was in reserve. We weren't the first ones to land. And before going, they fed us a good breakfast, a real good breakfast. Ham and eggs and everything you want. And they had, for Catholics, they had the last rites. So we went to Mass. But we were glad to. Let me tell you that right now. Let me tell you that right now. My religion came to the fore during this time. What else could you fall back on? So anyhow, we went down the side of our ship, which you have rope ladders with full field pack and all your stuff. And sometimes the Higgins boats that would take us in, they would be bouncing against the side of it. If you weren't careful and slipped and fell, you'd be dead. You'd get crushed. But we all had that training. Had been trained in go up the ships and down. So I landed in a Higgins boat with my company. Just my whole company was in the Higgins boat. And once we loaded up, we formed like a flotilla of the other ones and sort of abreast of each other, and we headed for the shoreline. And we didn't know what we were getting into. I didn't hear any fire or anything. And but we were praying, peeking over the boat's edge, and slowly we approached the beach. And when we were out a little way, they stopped it and dropped the ramp, and we went into the water, probably about waist deep, holding our rifles high. I didn't have a rifle. I had a carbine. I tried to look like the enlisted man. I would take off my emblems and take anything that looked like being an officer. But I did have a carbine, which is a little smaller than it's an automatic weapon, but it's a little smaller than the M1, which is a standard rifle then. And people would hold them over their heads and drop down in the wastewater on the coral and start towards shore. Well, the most amazing thing happened, that we had no opposition. Nobody resisted us. This was amazing, because this isn't the way most Marine Corps landings had been. You know, they had been torn up landing, and the history of marine invasions on islands is horrifically brutal. Think of Iwo Jima. And so it was like a Sunday school picnic. Hooray, we got aboard. We got on shore. Little did we know. But anyhow, the two divisions, we were the 6th Division on the left, and the 1st Marine Division, the oldest and very veterans, full with veterans. The 1st Division was on our right. And we went in abreast. Now, as we got in, we just milled around and to find out what was going to go on and wait for orders. And eventually the 1st Division went up the east coast of Okinawa. Now, Okinawa it runs pretty much north and south. It's very mountainous in the north and sort of just hilly in the south. And it runs anywhere from 10 miles wide, maybe, I don't know, maybe to 30 miles wide. And it's so we were ordered to go up the left side, on the northwest side of Okinawa, and the 1st Division was on the east side to clear it out. But while we were up there sitting on the hills, waiting for our orders, we looked out over the East China Sea, and you know the biggest armada probably ever assembled was at Okinawa. It probably even surpassed Beachhead in Normandy by this time. And for miles, it's just, the ships, it's amazing. There might be a couple thousand of them out there. Huge. But at that time, the kamikaze, we could sit on the side of the hill and see the kamikaze come in and dive bomb. A lot of them missed their targets, some of them hit their targets. And I think the Navy lost at least 2,000 sailors because it was the largest loss in naval history at Okinawa. The kamikaze, it was the last desperate attempt by the Japanese. And you'd see them come scooting in, and then some of them would hit a ship, and all of a sudden they'd hit most of them I think went into the drink because a lot of them were shot down. I have a good friend from Jacksonville named Charlie Towers. He was a prominent man, lawyer. He was in a boat out there, and we discussed this thing later on in our lives. And he got the Silver Star for his actions. And but that was the last desperate attempt by the Japanese to turn it around. But the Americans suffered a lot of casualties, ships and troops, but we prevailed. And it was kind of weird looking out there. It's like, I guess you're in a video game or something today, you'd call it, just watching them come in and explode, streak across the sky, and then you see Sometimes you'd see a tracer bullets, every 10 bullets there was a tracer coming after them and all that weaponry, but they were so far away from us out in the sea, I guess at least the distance at least 10 miles. So, but anyhow, then later on we were given orders to start heading north on Okinawa, which we did. Now we traveled with full field packs. Incidentally, I had been given, for medicinal purposes, a fifth of liquor. I don't know why they issued me a fifth of liquor. Well, by that time I had used it all up. I had drank it all up. But anyhow, we headed north, and in a staggered position, a military position. You know, we all walk 5 to 10 paces apart. And so we started up the west coast, and there's a road there. It was not too good of a road, but as we approached, it took us several days to move up to the north to Motobu, which is the highest mountain, and that's where the Japs were going to stand their ground, excuse me, and fight. So as we moved out, a few days later, all of a sudden, we were getting ready to encamp for the night, and something fell. Some artillery shells fell in our midst, and somebody said it was our own fire that they were misfiring or something. No, and finally we found out it was the enemy. They found out where we were at, and now we're going to start a little psychological warfare. They're going to start sending shells at us as we were approached, so it put the fear of the Lord in us. So I crawled in a cave, and I thought, oh my God, here it comes, you can't avoid it. So anyhow, the next day, we resumed our march and finally got up to the northern part, and were assigned a certain section to attack on Motobu. We headed out, our company. I was the first platoon leader. First platoon leader was a senior. I was a third senior officer in the company, being the senior platoon leader. There was 4 platoons, and I was the senior leader. And we were ordered to attack a certain section of the mountain. And as we were going through a sort of a cleared out area, the Japs had set up an ambush, and we got sucked into it, and all hell broke loose. We were like a bunch of rabbits in a cage or something being shot at. Direct fire, enfiladed fire from the sides, and I know my heel was shot off my shoe, and I said to myself, well, my first thought was, somebody's trying to kill me. It finally dawned on me. And 8 of my men were wiped out completely. Our gunny sergeant, who was a veteran of the war, of many battles, and received the Navy Cross, died manning a machine gun. And we lost a lot of troops in the company, and all we could do was scurry like so many, I don't know, rabbits, because we had to save your life. I mean, after all, I mean, you couldn't stand up and fight over something like that. And I often thought, God, we had to run and take cover, and I kept thinking to myself as Henry in the Red Badge of Courage, when he first got to battle, he started to run, he ran so fast. And but anyhow, we ran back to an area where we could get behind some rocks or ground and revamped and got our men back together. This is an affair which I have not much recollection. This is what I mean. Jake Heim got the Navy Cross because he took charge and took over, and I was trying to be helpful and so forth. I got the Bronze Star. I don't know what I did, but I guess I helped them to reorganize the troops. But we were in a sad way. our colonel was, because of this ambush and so forth, was relieved of his command, because I don't think they, I don't know, were very smart in their tactics. We were just had to follow orders, so that was my first real engagement in combat. And I remember coming back and trying to reassert ourselves, and I was hiding behind a rock against Japanese fire as we were trying to move forward. And it was April 12th, 1945. Some days you never forget. And somebody said, Franklin Roosevelt died. And I kept thinking, I couldn't get the significance of that right away because I was trying to save my own life. But anyhow, we, as I said, regrouped, reformed, and started another attack. And this time, we were supported by naval gunfire. You know, they fired from the ships. There's heavy weapons and napalm bombs. There was fire bombs dropped from airplanes. Our artillery. It never seemed to have too much effect. The only effect it has was it kept them. See, the Japanese were dug in like so many gophers, and then come out after all that bombing, and then start up fighting again. But it was during this type of support, weaponry support, that we were able to move forward. And you know, we always had a feeling that once you move forward to the stage, you didn't move back. But anyhow, we eventually, I wasn't with the main force that finally won. We were sort of supporting them, but our main force finally did reach the top and wipe them out. And when I say wipe them out, you didn't capture Japanese, they killed themselves. But we wiped out the resistance and captured the northern section of Okinawa eventually. And well, at that time, we were going back to a staging area. Guess who I ran into? Lieutenant Colonel Hayden, who was my commanding officer in Panama and who's recommended me for officers training. He was a battalion commander. And we had a nice chat. He followed my career quite well. He, when I graduated, was commissioned, he sent me a nice letter, and he even invited me over to his house for dinner one night. So he kept up with me, so it was nice to see him in Okinawa and make arrangements. I mean, to meet him again. Well, anyhow, so within a few days, after conquering the northern part, with the 1st Division was on the right, they cleaned up on the right, and I think they were probably involved also in the attack on the Motobu. Our regiment was the 29th Regiment, and I think the 1st Division was there too, and I'm not sure how active they were there, but I'm sure they were. But anyhow, the word came out then that they brought trucks up and loaded us in the trucks, and we were going now to head south to a spot about where we entered Okinawa. It's about in the central part of the island, and we were to go out there, and we were given orders to relieve the Army divisions who were bogged down in heavy fighting. What's coming up next is eventually one of the worst engagements in the Marine Corps history. It was I think, even exceeded Okinawa, Iwo Jima in its ferocity. But in Iwo Jima, they had to fight off their landing was very bad. They were shot up pretty much in Iwo Jima, even entering. We didn't have that effect, but our day was to come.